J.D. Salinger, A Life, by Kenneth Slawenski. Narrated by Norman Dietz. Copyright 2010 by Kenneth Slawenski. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Random House, an imprint of the Random House Publishing Group, a division of Random House Incorporated, and published by arrangement with Pomona, England Limited, and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Introduction. Since I've maintained a website devoted to the life and works of J.D. Salinger, it's grown extensively over time and receives a healthy amount of traffic, but rarely generates more than a handful of emails per day. So you can imagine my surprise when I checked the mail on Thursday, January 28, 2010, and found not 3 or 4 messages shouting to be opened, but 57. They were left unopened, too, for hours until I'd gathered up the courage to confront them. By glancing at the email on top of the heap, I knew exactly what had happened and how I would always remember that day. The news stared me down from my inbox through the starkest, most ugly of headers. It read, "Rest in peace, J.D. Salinger." It should have read, "Quicksand." A few words of explanation are probably in order here. For nearly as long as I'd been running the Salinger site, I'd been chipping away at this book, determined to one day deliver a true and fair and unsentimental account of Salinger's life, justly infused with appreciation for his works. After 7 years, I'd finally completed that task. In fact, I'd sent in the final draft of my final chapter only a week before. For 7 years, then, I'd been completely immersed in Salinger, in his writings, his philosophy, and the smallest details of his life. Salinger had become my constant companion, and now he was gone. Though I could perhaps push aside my emails for a time, I felt I couldn't ignore my website. My last post was now 3 weeks old, a message of congratulations to the author on his 91st birthday, complete with warm wishes for a long life that suddenly seemed obscene. Attempting to address Salinger's death, I searched my mind for a tribute I knew I should have already prepared, but had been unable to even consider. Impossibly I fumbled for a sentiment that would match the man. Not an epitaph. I remembered Holden Caulfield's disgust at all the phonies laying flowers on Allie's grave until it began to rain and their priorities suddenly shifted. Salinger himself didn't believe in death, and I knew that. What I needed to offer was a salute, a call to gratitude rather than sorrow. What Salinger deserved was an affirmation, and I requested that others join me in presenting it. I still doubt the quality of my delivery. It pales in the face of countless eloquent memorials Salinger's received since. But it's honest and heartfelt. It's not mourning for the dead. It's an invitation to salute. A salute not to the memory, but to the essence of J.D. Salinger. And I offer it here again to anyone who wishes to honor the author now or at any time in the years to come. Read, explore, whether for the first time or 20th, The Catcher in the Rye. Read 9 stories, Franny and Zoe, Raise High the Roof Beam, and Seymour. Re-experience Salinger's works in tribute to the author who is so deeply embedded within them. Salinger the man may be gone, and for that the world is an emptier place, but he will always live within the pages he created, and through his art remain as vital today and tomorrow as when he walked the boulevards of New York and strolled the woods of New Hampshire. Kenneth Slawenski, March 2010. Chapter 1. Sunny. The Great War had changed everything. As 1919 dawned, people awoke to a fresh new world, one filled with promise but uncertainty. Old ways of life, beliefs and assumptions unchallenged for decades, were now called into question or swept away. The guns had fallen silent only weeks before. The old world now lay in ruins. In its place stood a new nation poised to assume the mantle of leadership. No place in that land was more anxious or more ready than the city of New York. It was the first day of the first year of peace when Miriam Gillick Salinger gave birth to a son. His sister, Doris, had been born 6 years before. In the years since Doris's birth, Miriam had suffered a series of miscarriages. This child, too, was almost lost. So it was with a mixture of joy and relief that Miriam and Solomon Salinger welcomed their son into the world. They named him Jerome David, but from the very first day they called him Sonny. Sonny was born into a middle-class Jewish family that was both unconventional and ambitious. The Salinger line reached back to the village of Sudargas, a tiny Jewish settlement, or shtetl, situated on the Polish-Lithuanian border of the Russian Empire, a village where, records show, the family had lived at least since 1831. But the Salingers weren't given to tradition or nostalgia. By the time Sonny was born, their link to that world had nearly evaporated. Sonny's father was robust and motivated, determined to go his own way in life. Typical of the sons of immigrants, he'd resolved to free himself of any connection with the world of his parents' birth, a place he considered backward. Unknown to Solomon at the time, his rebellion was actually a family tradition. The Salingers had gone their own way for generations, seldom looking back and growing increasingly prosperous with each step. As Sonny would one day reflect, his ancestors had an amazing penchant for diving from immense heights into small containers of water, and hitting their mark every time. Hyman Joseph Salinger, Sonny's great-grandfather, had moved from Sudargas to the more prosperous town of Tauragay in order to marry into a prominent family. Through his writings, J.D. Salinger later immortalized his great-grandfather as the clown Zozo, honoring him as the family patriarch and confiding that he felt his great-grandfather's spirit always watched over him. Hyman Joseph remained in Russia all his life, and died 9 years before the birth of his great-grandson. Salinger knew of him only through a photograph, an image that offered a glimpse into another world. It depicted an elderly peasant brimming with nobility, erect in his long black gown and flowing white beard, and sporting a tremendous nose, a feature that Salinger confessed made him shudder with apprehension. Sonny's grandfather, Simon F. Salinger, was also ambitious. In 1881, a year of famine, though not in Tauragay itself, he left home and family and immigrated to the United States. Soon after arriving in America, Simon married Fanny Copeland, also a Lithuanian immigrant, at Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. The couple then moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where they found an apartment in one of the city's many immigrant neighborhoods, and where, on March 16, 1887, Fanny gave birth to Sonny's father, Solomon, the second of 5 surviving children. By 1893, the Salingers were living in Louisville, Kentucky, where Simon attended medical school. His religious training in Russia served him well, enabling him to practice as a rabbi in order to finance his education. Upon obtaining his medical degree, Simon left the pulpit and, after a brief return to Pennsylvania, moved the family to its final destination in the center of Chicago, where he set up a general practice not far from Cook County Hospital. Sonny knew his grandfather well, as do readers of The Catcher in the Rye. Dr. Salinger often traveled to New York to visit his son, and was the basis of Holden Caulfield's grandfather, the endearing man who would embarrass Holden by reading all the street signs aloud while riding the bus. Simon Salinger died in 1960, just short of his 100th birthday. In the opening lines of The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield refuses to share his parents' past with the reader, deriding any recount of how they were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. My parents, he explains, would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told anything pretty personal about 'em. This apparent elusiveness on the part of Holden's parents was imported directly from the attitudes of Salinger's own mother and father. Sal and Miriam rarely spoke of past events, especially to their children, and their attitude created an air of secrecy that permeated the Salinger household and caused Doris and Sonny to grow into intensely private people. The Salingers' insistence upon privacy also led to rumors. Over the years, Miriam and Sal's story has been repeatedly embellished. This began in 1963, when the literary critic Warren French repeated a claim in a Life magazine article that Miriam had been Scotch-Irish. In time, the term Scotch-Irish transformed itself into the assertion that Salinger's mother had actually been born in County Cork, Ireland. This led, in turn, to what's perhaps the most commonly repeated story told about Salinger's mother and father, that Miriam's parents, supposedly Irish Catholic, were so adamantly opposed to her marriage to Sal because he was Jewish that they gave the couple little choice but to elope. And upon learning of their daughter's defiance, they never spoke a word to her again. None of this has any basis in fact. Yet by the time of her death in 2001, even Salinger's sister Doris had been persuaded that her mother had been born in Ireland, and that she and Sonny had been purposely denied a relationship with their grandparents. The circumstances surrounding Miriam's family and her marriage to Sal were quite painful enough without embroidery through rumor. However, Salinger's parents exacerbated that pain by attempting to conceal their past from their children. In so doing, they not only invited fictitious versions of their history, but confused their children, too. By attempting to restrain Doris's and Sonny's natural curiosity, Miriam and Sal actually gave credence to a fabricated past that remained with them all their lives. Sonny's mother was born Marie Gillick on May 11, 1891, in the small Midwestern town of Atlantic, Iowa. Her parents, Nellie and George Lester Gillick, Jr., were 20 and 24, respectively, at the time of her birth, and records show that she was the second of 6 surviving children. Marie's grandparents, George Lester Gillick, Sr. and Mary Jane Bennett, had been the first Gillicks to settle in Iowa. The grandson of German immigrants, George Sr., had moved from Massachusetts to Ohio, where he met and married his wife. He served briefly with the 192nd Ohio Regiment during the Civil War, and after he returned home in 1865, Mary Jane gave birth to Marie's father. George Sr. eventually established himself as a successful grain merchant, and by 1891 was in firm position as head of the Gillick clan, with his sons George Jr. and Frank following him into the trade. Although Marie later maintained that her mother, Nellie McMahon, had been born in Kansas City in 1871, the daughter of Irish immigrants, 4 sets of federal census records, 1900, 1910, 1920, and 1930, suggest that she's more likely to have come from Iowa. Family tradition has it that Marie met Solomon early in 1910 at a county fair near the Gillick family farm, an unlikely location since no such farm existed. The manager of a Chicago movie theater, Solomon, who was called Solly by his family and Sol by his friends, was 6 feet tall with a whiff of big city sophistication. Just 17, Marie was an arresting beauty, with fair skin and long red hair that contrasted with Sol's olive complexion. Their romance was immediate and intense, and Sol was determined to marry Marie from the start. A rapid series of events, some of them heartbreaking, would occur that year, culminating in Marie's marriage to Sol in the spring of 1910. While the Salingers had steadily improved their position since Simon's arrival, the Gillicks had suddenly encountered difficulties. Marie's father had died the previous year. Unable to keep the family afloat, her mother had taken the youngest of the children and relocated to Michigan, where she later remarried. Marie didn't move with her mother because of her age and her relationship with Sol. Her swift romance and marriage to Solomon, therefore, proved to be providential, especially when, by the time of Sonny's birth in 1919, her mother, Nellie, had also died. The loss of both parents was possibly enough to make Marie reluctant to discuss them, even with her own children. Rather than cling to the past, she devoted herself completely to a new life with her new husband. Left with only the Salingers now as family, she sought their acceptance by embracing Judaism and changing her name to Miriam, after the sister of Moses. Simon and Fanny thought that Marie, with her milky fair skin and auburn hair, looked like a little Irisher. In a city with thousands of eligible Jewish girls, they never dreamed that Solly would bring home a red-haired Gentile from Iowa. But they accepted Miriam as their new daughter-in-law, and she soon moved into their Chicago home. Miriam joined Sol working at the movie theater, where she sold tickets and concessions. Despite their efforts, the theater was unsuccessful and was forced to close, sending the new bridegroom in search of employment. He soon found a position working for J.S. Hoffman & Company, an importer of European cheeses and meats that went by the brand name Hofko. After the disappointment with the theater, Sol swore never to fail at business again, and applied himself to his new company duties with devotion. This dedication paid off, and after Doris's birth in December 1912, he was promoted to general manager of Hoffman's New York division, becoming, as he coolly declared, the manager of a cheese factory. Sol's new position required the Salingers to move to New York City, where they settled into a comfortable apartment at 500 West 113th Street, close to Columbia University and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Although Sol was now in the business of vending a series of hams, distinctly the most unkosher of foods, along with his cheeses, he'd managed to continue the Salinger custom of advancing beyond the previous generation, an accomplishment of which he was extraordinarily proud. But business became his life, and by the time of his 30th birthday in 1917, his hair had gone completely iron gray. Until he was 13, Sonny attended public school on the Upper West Side. The 1920s were years of unparalleled prosperity, and no place shone brighter than New York City. It was the economic, cultural, and intellectual capital of the Americas, perhaps even of the world. Its values were beamed across the continent through radio and absorbed by millions through publications. Its streets held sway over the economic vitality of nations, and its advertising and markets determined the desires and tastes of a generation. In this opportune place and time, the Salingers thrived. Between Sonny's birth in 1919 and 1928, Sal and Miriam moved the family 3 times, always to a more affluent Manhattan neighborhood. When Sonny was born, they were living at 3681 Broadway, in an apartment located in North Harlem. Before the year's end, they'd moved back to their original New York neighborhood into a residence at 511 West 113th Street. A more ambitious move came in 1928 when the family rented an apartment just a few blocks from Central Park at 215 West 82nd Street. This home came complete with servants' quarters, and Sal and Miriam quickly hired a live-in maid, an Englishwoman named Jenny Burnett. Sonny grew up in a world of increasing comfort, insulated by his parents' indulgence and their growing social status. In the 1920s, religion and nationality became increasingly important the higher one climbed the social ladder. In New York especially, pedigree and Protestantism were the hallmarks of respectability. As the Salingers advanced upward and downtown, they shifted increasingly into an atmosphere of intolerance that would prove uncomfortable. In reaction, they raised Sonny and Doris with a mixture of lukewarm religious and ethnic traditions. They never forced their children to go to church or synagogue, and the family celebrated both Christmas and Passover. Later in life, Salinger would craft most of his characters with similar backgrounds. Both the Glass and Tannenbaum families would easily acknowledge their half-Christian, half-Jewish heritage, and Holden Caulfield would comment that his father had been a Catholic once, but had quit. Miriam adored her son, perhaps because his birth was a difficult one, or in response to feeling abandoned during her own youth, she indulged him. Sonny could do no wrong. This put Solomon in the precarious position of attempting to discipline him while trying not to invoke the wrath of his wife, which could be considerable. By most accounts, when a crisis arose in the family, it was usually Miriam's judgment that prevailed, leaving Sonny largely unrestrained. Salinger blossomed under his mother's attention, and he was close to her all her life, even dedicating The Catcher in the Rye to my mother. She always believed that her son was destined for greatness, a belief he came to share. Consequently, they had a rare bond of understanding. Well into adulthood, Salinger and his mother exchanged gossipy letters, and he reveled in telling her acerbic stories of the people that he knew. Even during the war, Miriam enjoyed cutting articles out of movie star magazines and sending them to her son, complete with her own comments scribbled in the margins. Salinger spent hours on the front line reading the clippings his mother had sent him, all the while dreaming of Hollywood and home. Reinforcing each other in these ways, Miriam and Jerome shared a sense of humor and closeness that unified them, often to the exclusion of others. Because his mother understood him so well and believed in his talent completely, he came to expect the same reaction from others, and had little patience or consideration for those who might doubt him or not share his point of view. Among the doubters was Salinger's father. As he rose in status, Sal came to identify with the world of his neighbors, for the most part wealthy businessmen and stockbrokers, and allowed his heritage as the son of Jewish immigrants to recede discreetly into the background. In 1920, when he described himself as the manager of a cheese factory to census takers, he admitted that his parents had been born in Russia. By 1930, he presented his situation differently, informing record takers that he worked in produce as a commission merchant and his parents had been born in Ohio. Solomon clearly saw nothing wrong in blending in as a route to success. Though some might regard this as evidence of a talent for fiction that his son would soon inherit, Sal came to represent the very values that his son scorned, traits that Salinger's future characters would condemn as phoniness, concession, and greed. Worse still, Sal never seemed to understand his son's aspirations and wondered why Sonny couldn't be more practical. When Salinger, at an early age, expressed a desire to become an actor, Sal balked at the idea, in spite of his wife's tacit approval. Then, when he later announced his intention to become a writer, Sal scoffed again. Not surprisingly, Salinger grew up considering his father short-sighted and insensitive, and their relationship was strained. Years later, Sonny's best friend, Herb Kaufman, would recall having dinner at the Salinger home as a teenager when Sonny and Sal began to fight. Sal just didn't want his son to be a writer, he observed, adding that Jerome often treated his father unfairly. Perhaps upon Sal's insistence, Sonny was sent away every summer to Camp Wigwam, located far from New York City, deep within the woods of Maine. Yet if Sal hoped that Sonny's camp experience would teach him conformity, he was mistaken. Founded in 1910, Camp Wigwam was a model of diversity that placed strong and equal emphasis on both athletics and the creative arts. Sonny flourished in this atmosphere. Camp records show that he excelled in sports and other group activities, but he was especially drawn to the camp's theatrical program. In 1930, at the age of 11, Jerome, Salinger was called both Sonny and Jerome at camp, took part in a number of camp plays, starring in 2, and was named Favorite Camp Actor. This distinction resulted in a fascination with the theater that would last for years. Salinger also stood out physically. He was taller than the other children, and the camp's 1930 group photo shows him looming over the rest with his shirt playfully torn to resemble Tarzan's. Basking in this attention, Salinger enjoyed Camp Wigwam, and the memories of his childhood summers in the woods always remained happy and vivid. Later in life, they would inspire him to seek refuge in similar surroundings and to return there through his stories, sending his characters off to camp one after another. Author's note: almost a century after its founding, Camp Wigwam is still in operation, practically unchanged from the time that Salinger enrolled there. It still sports the same infirmary where Seymour Glass developed a crush on a nurse in Hapworth 16, 1924. It also continues the policy of spending money from home that Holden Caulfield so bitterly complained of in The Ocean Full of Bowling Balls. In 1930, the Great Depression gripped America. New York City was no longer a place of opportunity. Gleaming scenes of commerce and optimism were replaced by breadlines and despair. If Sal and Miriam's march into high society the decade before had been remarkable, it now became astonishing. Defying the tide of poverty that permeated the city, the Salingers continued to increase their wealth and improve their social status. In 1932, they made what would prove to be their final move, across Central Park to the grand Upper East Side. Sal moved his family into a plush apartment in the Carnegie Hill district at 1133 Park Avenue at 91st Street. In a city of contrasting neighborhoods, where location was a defining factor of self-worth, the Salingers' new home was the epitome of success. Affluent and comfortable, the prestigious building was within sight of Central Park and within easy walking distance of the Park Zoo and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Salingers were so proud of their new home that for many years they used personalized stationery whose letterhead excluded the family name but included the Park Avenue address. Until the Salingers moved to 1133, Sonny had attended public schools on the West Side, but the sons of successful Park Avenue businessmen did not attend public school. Instead, they were given a private education, usually at a prestigious boarding school far from home. The Salingers wanted something similar for their own son, but were unwilling to have him move away, so they opted to send him to school.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?